Hello, my dear listeners. I hope you're doing well. Today I want to begin with a question. Have you ever walked out of a conversation feeling disappointed with yourself? I mean, while you were speaking English, your mind suddenly became completely blank. In your head, the idea was absolutely clear. You knew exactly what you wanted to express, but somehow the words refused to come out. And then the conversation ended. You smiled politely, you walked away, and suddenly, as if by magic, every sentence came back. You thought, oh no, why didn't I say that? That sentence was so easy. I knew the answer. Why couldn't I remember it? If you have ever experienced this, I want you to know something. It doesn't mean you're bad at English. It doesn't even mean you don't know enough vocabulary. Most of the time, it simply means your brain was under pressure. And today, instead of giving you grammar rules or vocabulary list, let's simply have a conversation about why this happens and, more importantly, how we can slowly train our brain not to freeze. Because believe me, almost every English speaker has gone through this phase. Yes, even people who speak English fluently today. Let me tell you about someone. A few months ago, one of my students joined one of my speaking sessions. Now, before the class started, she was chatting comfortably in Hindi with everyone. She was smiling, laughing, telling stories. She looked completely relaxed. Then I smiled and said, okay, everyone, let's switch to English. And something changed instantly. Her smile disappeared. She looked at the screen, she adjusted her earphones, she looked down for a few seconds and then quietly said, ma'am, I forgot everything. I smiled and asked, what did you forget? She laughed nervously. My English. Now, honestly, that answer made me smile because I've heard it hundreds of times. People don't forget English. English doesn't suddenly disappear from the brain. What disappears is confidence. The moment we feel someone is listening carefully, our brain starts behaving differently. Instead of listening to the conversation, it starts listening to our fears. Don't make a mistake. What if they laugh? What if my pronunciation sounds funny? What if I use the wrong tense? What if I forget a word? You're no longer talking to another person. You're fighting with your own thoughts. And when your brain is busy fighting itself, it has very little energy left for speaking. Imagine trying to cook dinner while answering five phone calls at the same time. Would you cook properly? Probably not. The same thing happens inside our brain. It is not weak, it is not slow, it's simply overloaded. There is another reason many learners go blank, and I think this one is even more common. Let me ask you something. When someone asks you a simple question like, what did you do yesterday? What happens inside your head? For many learners, the process looks something like this. First, they understand the English question. Then, they immediately translate it into Hindi. After that, they think of an answer in Hindi. Then, they begin translating that answer back into English. Then, they check whether the grammar is correct. Then, they worry about pronunciation. Then, they wonder whether there is a better vocabulary word. And after doing all of that, they finally open their mouth. By that time, 5 or 6 seconds have already passed. The other person is waiting. Now you're feeling awkward. And because you're feeling awkward, your brain starts working even more slowly. It's like getting stuck in traffic. The more you panic, the longer it takes to move. I remember another learner who once told me something that stayed with me. She said, ma'am, when I'm alone, I speak English surprisingly well. But the moment another person starts listening, I become a beginner again. And I asked her, so what changes? Your vocabulary? She smiled. No. I said, your grammar? No. So what changes? She became quiet for a few seconds and finally said, my confidence. Exactly. Most people think confidence comes after fluency, but in reality, confidence grows while you are speaking imperfectly. Nobody wakes up one morning suddenly feeling confident. Confidence is built conversation by conversation, mistake by mistake, awkward pause by awkward pause. And here is something I really want you to remember. The goal of a conversation is not to impress people, the goal is to connect with people. Think about your own language for a moment. When your friend is talking to you in Hindi, do you secretly judge every grammar mistake they make? Probably not. You listen to their idea, their emotions, their story. English speakers do exactly the same. Most people are far less interested in your grammar than you imagine. The person you are talking to is usually busy thinking about what they are going to say next. They're not sitting there with an invisible red pen correcting your sentences. There is something else I've noticed over the years. Many learners think that fluent speakers never pause. Have you ever thought that? Maybe you've watched interviews on YouTube or listened to podcasts, and it seemed as if the speaker always knew exactly what to say. So you start believing fluent people don't hesitate. But that's simply not true. Even native English speakers pause. Even they forget words sometimes. Even they stop in the middle of a sentence and say, wait, that's not the word I'm looking for. The difference is they don't panic when it happens. That's the key. They trust themselves. But many English learners don't. The moment they forget one word, they immediately think, oh no, everything is over. My English is terrible. And from that moment, the conversation becomes 10 times more difficult. Let me give you an example. Suppose you're talking to someone and you want to say, yesterday I went to the supermarket, but I forgot my wallet. Now imagine that. Suddenly, you forget the word wallet. Many learners immediately stop speaking. They become silent. They apologize. They feel embarrassed. Sometimes they even switch to Hindi. But do you know what a confident speaker would do? They would simply say, yesterday I went to the supermarket, but I forgot, the thing where we keep money and cards? And the other person immediately says, wallet? Yes, wallet. Conversation continues. No stress, no embarrassment. Do you see the difference? Fluent speakers don't know every word. They simply know how to keep the conversation alive. And honestly, that's a much more valuable skill. I remember something that happened during one of my speaking sessions. A learner was trying to explain how to make tea. Now, that sounds like a very easy topic, doesn't it? She started confidently. First, we boiled the water, then suddenly she stopped. She wanted to say ginger, but she couldn't remember the word. For almost 15 seconds, she remained completely silent. Finally, she smiled nervously and said, Ma'am, I forgot. I asked her, what do you do when you make tea? She replied, I add, I smiled and said, forget the word, just describe it. Immediately, she said, the spicy thing we cut into small pieces. Everyone in the class smiled. One student quickly said, Ginger. She laughed too. And the conversation continued. Now tell me honestly, did communication stop? No. Did she fail? Absolutely not. In fact, she learned something much more important that day. She realized that communication is not about knowing every single word. Communication is about finding another way when one road is blocked. Think about children for a moment. Have you ever noticed how children speak? They don't stop every time they forget a word. They invent words. They point. They describe things, they use expressions, and somehow people understand them. Adults do the opposite. Adults become silent. Children become creative. Maybe that's one habit we should borrow from children. There is another mistake that almost every learner makes. And honestly, I made this mistake too when I was learning. We expect ourselves to answer immediately. Someone asks a question, and we think we must reply within a second. Why? Who made that rule? Imagine someone asks you, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence? Even in your mother tongue, you would probably pause for a few seconds before answering because you're thinking. So, why do we become so nervous when we pause in English? There is absolutely nothing wrong with taking your time. In fact, fluent speakers do it all the time. They say things like, that's an interesting question. Let me think for a moment. I have never really thought about that before. Well, actually, these aren't filler words. They are thinking tools. They give your brain a few extra seconds without making the conversation feel awkward. And here's something practical for you. Instead of memorizing hundreds of difficult vocabulary words this week, memorize 10 thinking expressions. Expressions like, give me a second, let me think, that's a good question, I'm not completely sure. As far as I know, from my experience, I have never really thought about that. You'll be surprised how much calmer you feel during conversations. because now your brain has somewhere to rest while it prepares the next sentence. Sometimes the biggest improvement doesn't come from learning more English, it comes from reducing fear. Because your English is often much better than your confidence allows you to believe. There is one sentence that I hear almost every day. People tell me, "Ma'am, I know English, but when someone starts talking to me, I become nervous." And every time I hear that sentence, I ask them another question. Tell me, what happens inside your mind at that moment? Most of them give almost the same answer. They say, "Ma'am, I start thinking too much." And honestly, that's exactly the problem. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're driving a car. You're moving comfortably. The road is clear. The weather is pleasant. Suddenly, someone beside you starts giving you instructions every 2 seconds. Slow down. No, change the gear. You're driving too fast. Watch that bike. Careful. Turn. Brake. Look there. Now tell me, will driving become easier or more difficult? Of course, more difficult. Not because you don't know how to drive, but because too many voices are competing inside your head. The same thing happens while speaking English. One voice says, "Speak." Another voice says, "What if it's the wrong tense?" Then another voice says, "Don't forget pronunciation." And another one says, "Maybe this vocabulary isn't advanced enough." And before you know it, you have created so much noise inside your own mind that you can't even hear your own thoughts anymore. Sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't English, it's overthinking. Have you ever noticed little children learning a language? It's one of my favorite things to observe. A small child doesn't wake up one morning and think, "Today I'll use the present perfect continuous tense." No. The child simply wants something. Maybe a toy, maybe water, maybe a chocolate. The purpose is communication. Grammar comes later. That's exactly how we all learned our first language. Nobody handed us a grammar book before teaching us to speak. We learned by listening, repeating, making mistakes, getting corrected naturally. Imagine if every 2-year old stopped speaking because they made a grammar mistakes. None of us would ever learn a language. So, why do adults expect themselves to be perfect from day one? Sometimes I think we have forgotten how to be beginners. We have become so afraid of looking inexperienced that we never give ourselves permission to learn. And learning always looks imperfect in the beginning. Always. Let me ask you something. Suppose tomorrow someone asks you, "What did you do last weekend?" How would you answer? Now, don't answer immediately. Just think. Did your brain automatically start translating? Did you first think in Hindi, then search for English? If yes, don't worry. Almost everyone starts there. But here is a small challenge for you. Tomorrow, instead of translating your whole answer, try thinking in tiny English pictures. Imagine you're telling a story through photographs. I woke up late. I made tea. I cleaned my room. My friend called. We went to a cafe. Notice something. These are short ideas, simple, natural. Your brain doesn't have to carry an entire paragraph, it only has to carry one small thought at a time. Speaking becomes easier when you stop trying to deliver a speech. Instead, just tell the story one moment at a time. That's exactly how conversations happen in real life. Nobody speaks in perfect paragraphs. We speak in connected thoughts. Here is another habit that quietly destroys your confidence: comparing yourself with people who have been learning English for years. Social media has made this problem even bigger. You watch someone speaking beautiful English on YouTube, perfect pronunciation, advanced vocabulary, smooth fluency, and within 30 seconds, your brain says, "I'll never speak like that." But what you don't see is their journey. You don't see the thousands of mistakes they made, the awkward conversations, the embarrassing moments, the days when they also forgot simple words. You're comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. That's never a fair comparison. The only comparison that matters is this: can you speak a little better than you spoke last month? Can you understand one more podcast? Can you express one more idea without translating? If the answer is yes, you're already improving. And honestly, that's something worth celebrating. Remember, fluency isn't built in one brilliant conversation, it's built in hundreds of ordinary conversations. One small sentence today, Another tomorrow, a mistake, a correction, a smile, a little more confidence. That's how language grows. Quietly, almost invisibly, until one day someone compliments your English and you suddenly realize, I didn't even notice myself improving. I think that's the most beautiful part of learning any language. You don't wake up fluent, you simply wake up one day and realize you're no longer afraid to speak. Now, before we say goodbye today, I want you to do something for me. The next time you find yourself in a conversation and your mind suddenly goes blank, don't panic. Don't tell yourself, I'm bad at English. Instead, take a slow breath, smile, and remind yourself, I don't have to speak perfect English. I just have to communicate. Because language isn't about impressing people, it's about sharing your thoughts, your ideas, your stories, and a little piece of who you are. And believe me, every conversation you have, every mistake you make, every time you search for a word, every awkward pause, your brain is learning something. Progress is happening, even when you can't see it. So please, don't quit just because today's conversation didn't go the way you wanted. One difficult conversation doesn't decide your future. One forgotten word doesn't define your English. One mistake doesn't erase everything you have learned. Keep showing up, keep speaking, keep making mistakes. Because every fluent English speaker you admire today once stood exactly where you are right now. They were not born confident, they became confident by refusing to give up. And I truly hope that one day you'll look back at this stage of your journey and smile. You'll remember the days when you were afraid to speak, and you will realize how far you have come. If this episode made you feel a little lighter, or if it answered a question you've been carrying for a long time, I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. What usually makes your mind go blank while speaking English? Is it fear, grammar, vocabulary, or simply the pressure of being judged? Your comments don't just inspire me, they also help thousands of other learners realize they are not alone. And if you know someone who always says, I understand English, but I can't speak it, please share this episode with them. Sometimes a simple conversation can change someone's entire way of learning. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Your presence here means more than you know. Until we meet again, be patient with yourself. Speak a little, listen a little more, learn something new every day, and remember, fluency isn't built in one perfect conversation. It's built in hundreds of imperfect ones. Take care, my dear listeners. I'll see you in the next episode.